Good evening, everyone. We're just about ready to get started, working in the background, get all of our presenters here and ready to go. So we'll start in just a moment. Um, we have an amazing team of students behind us helping, so working, like I said, make sure everything is set to go. But I will get started and we'll move forward from there. So good evening and welcome to the Bellevue School District 2021 Virtual STEM Fair. I'm Scott Powers, the Director of Teaching and Learning for the Bellevue School District, and it is my pleasure to kick off tonight's event. Prior to my current role, I was the principal at Sammamish High School, where I worked with an amazing educator, Miss Lisa Neshaba. She's been able to tap into the passions of her students to construct, promote, and execute this event for many years. Her leadership has been key ensuring this event continues. And even during a pandemic, when she's working in a variety of schools, she's found a group of students who will take up the mantle of authentic learning and put together this tremendous event for our community. I want to applaud those students for their efforts along with Ms. Neshaba. While we might not all be gathered together in the auditorium to hear the presentations, be able to go out in the halls and touch the exhibits or physically interact with examples of the boundaries of technology, we are all able to experience this event with advances in technology. I'm here in my basement, which you can't see from my background. I'm promoting today's event all day long. Many of you are at your home, at your offices, and yet we're able to connect with fair ease and bring people from around the region together. Over the course this week, you'll have an opportunity to hear from panels discussing a wide range of STEM areas. What is so impressive is we are right now in front of our own eyes seeing the application of cutting edge work in many of these areas. While this COVID-19 may have significantly impacted us over the last year, the whole process of developing some of the vaccines is like nothing we have seen previously. Quickly after identifying the virus, the entire genome sequence was determined. Companies using mRNA technology, which has been in development for 30 years, were able for the first time to create a vaccine with this technology. All of this done under a year. So when we think about tonight's panel, biology, chemistry, and the medical fields, all coming together to work towards that and hear about the other work that's happening in these fields. We have also recently witnessed the amazing photos of NASA's Mars Perseverance. A helicopter on Mars dropped from the belly of a rover, the first audio recordings of the Red Planet. It's been amazing to see several STEM fields come together to create and execute this 39 million mile journey. You will have a chance on Tuesday to hear from astronomy and physics panel, on Thursday the computer science and robotics panel, and on Friday the engineering panel. All of these areas of STEM which have come together to put on this extraterrestrial feat. And then we also have a panel that will happen that will be talking about climate science and the environment and all the work that's happening around there. But these are just great examples of the type of work that's happening around the world and some of it right here in our own community. So I want to say thank you again to this amazing team that has organized this event over this week. I am excited for us to learn together about the amazing work happening around the globe and for students to have a greater understanding of the breadth of careers in the areas of discovery and innovation. So on behalf of the Bellevue School District, welcome to the Bellevue School District 2021 STEM Fair. And so with that, I turn it over and I hope we got to be somebody who's going to introduce our guest.
All right. Hello. Thank you so much, Mr. Powers, for that incredible intro explaining STEM Fair. I want to thank you all for coming here today. STEM Fair is a great way to learn about different careers from real professionals. I want to encourage everyone to come to other panels going on the rest of the week. These panels cover a wide range of topics, and you never know what you might find. You can go to our website and join through the event links there. After each panel, including today, students are able to engage with panelists by asking them questions. You can ask questions to the panelists by using the Q&A feature. To access the Q&A feature, you should see a chat bubble button with a question mark. If you click this, you can type your questions for the panelists. You can also use the Q&A if you have any questions about STEM Fair. Okay. Next, we will have our keynote speaker, Dr. Gupta speak about putting COVID-19 behind us. Dr. Gupta is a public health policy expert and a regular health policy analyst for NBC News. Dr. Gupta will give his keynote address, and afterwards we will have the Q&A. Dr. Gupta is having a few technological issues, but we expect he will be online within the next 5 minutes. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. All right.
Okay. Well, I apologize for the time it took me to sign on there. It looks like I needed to be on a different login. Apologies, everybody. And I'm happy to stay later to make up for time lost, but it's great to be here. Mike, since I have you, I just wanted to make sure that I am doing the screen share appropriately. I'm usually used to a very different platform. You know what, Mike? I'm gonna send you my slides if that's okay. And it looks like my screen share option is not working for whatever reason. So I'm just gonna shoot that over to you by email. But then just get started, and if it's okay, I'll just ask for next slide.
Mike, is that something you're comfortable with? This is Nesh. I mean, do you know how to do that? Because I don't know
Yes,
that I do.
that's good, Dr. Gupta. Thank you.
Dr. Gupta, this is why I have students run things instead of me. Thank you. We're all good. It's all good. We're going to get started here. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No, I in this era of virtual everything, I apologize for the snafus here, but only 14 minutes behind schedule. So anyhow, as we're waiting for the slides, it's great to join all of you for the kickoff for your STEM fair. I really appreciate the outreach and thinking of me for this keynote. And it's good that we're getting all the bad juju out of the way up front so that the rest of the event goes smoothly. But again, thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Vin Gupta. Maybe I'll start out while we're waiting for the slides to load. I am a pulmonary critical care doc at the University of Washington, where I practice about 20% of my time. So I'm a pulmonologist in intensive care units in hospitals, both in Seattle and then occasionally backfilling in hotspots across the United States. Just as we came back from a stint down in Tucson, where and I'll talk about this in a little bit, where I saw a very different reality down in Arizona relative to the reality that we have here in Seattle, which I would say is we've been lucky to I think, escape the worst impacts of this virus in terms of death and disability. But very different in depending on the state you're in. So I'm a clinician at my core, but I have a few different roles in public health. One of which is I've been helping to guide as Amazon's CMO their COVID-19 response, and so it's something that takes up a lot of my time. How does the company keep its essential work staff in fulfillment centers that essentially are the engine to get us what we want on demand? How do we keep those workers safe and healthy? That has been a process, and it's been a challenge that medical school, certainly for those of you that are heading towards medical school, does not prepare you for. And I'll happy to answer questions about just what it's like working for a global multinational company, trying to keep it safe and healthy as it operates in a pandemic. And I previously wasn't actually at Amazon prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and so it's been really just learning by fire and really getting in there, understanding different regulations country by country when it comes to what tests they accept for COVID-19, what expectations do they have of an employer like Amazon when it comes to keeping workers safe and healthy. So really just an interesting experience. And then I'm a reservist at Joint Base Lewis McChord as a deployable ICU doc. And so for those of you that are maybe contemplating a career in our uniformed services, I can say, and I'm happy to talk about this, especially my experiences both as an active duty physician for the Air Force and now as a reservist has been one of the most memorable experiences of my life to date. And I think it's something that we don't talk enough about, which is how do we serve our country? How do we do it in uniform? As especially in the setting of STEM like discussions coming up. If you're thinking about science, if you're thinking about engineering or medicine, that sort of general technology, that general category of career options, at least I wasn't exposed to. Well, how does that potentially interface with a desire to serve your country in uniform? It turns out there's a lot of different ways that you can sync your career interests as a civilian in STEM related careers with service to country, either as an active duty member or as a reservist. And so happy to talk about that. And then lastly, and this truly I didn't plan on, but has been a big part of at least the last 14 months, has been a growing presence in media, especially national media, advocating on science-based policies, making sure that we had the best science communication for the general public when it came to understanding the pandemic and ways you can keep yourself healthy and safe. Clearly a huge need, in my view, after just seeing what's been happening in our public debate for the last 14 months, and being inserted into the center of that for NBC and MSNBC has been, again, a huge learning experience and something I look forward to talking to you about more in this coming hour. Mike, is just so I can provide some structure here. I don't know if you had a chance to, if those slides ended up coming through. If not, I can I'm happy just to talk without leaning on slides.
Yeah, sorry about that, Dr. Gupta. It should be only 2 more minutes. Nesh has gotten the slides, but I have not yet. I guess it's just my slow internet, but we're working on that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So the way I'd like to structure this, and recognizing that there's only so much you can talk about in the hour that we have, I'm putting my email just preemptively before I forget. If there are questions on any of the aforementioned topics, please do reach out to me. I'd love to be able to help in any way possible. But I know this is a STEM fair, and I know that we're in very, very unique times. And so what I'd like to do with this talk is really focus in on where are we right now in the pandemic. What are our current challenges to normalcy and to achieving normalcy? And then ultimately, what are the areas that, what are the policy hurdles that at least that I've been passionate about, that I think are really critical for the nation to wrestle with, so that we can achieve a durable normalcy, not just a short-lived one. So that's how I'm thinking about structuring the next 30 or so minutes. And please interject with questions. I think events like this are only more enriched if we have an ongoing discussion. So please don't hesitate to interrupt with a question in the chat, or raise your hand.
Sorry to interrupt, but we have a question in the chat. What level of medical training is needed to be a medic in the armed forces?
Krishna, thank you for that question. Oh, and I see it right there. Perfect. You know, it turns out that you actually only need to go to medical school. That there is a category of medical officers that exists, whether it's the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, that are general medical officers, where you need to have graduated from medical school, and then you can fulfill this role of a GMO, general medical officer, where you're basically learning on the fly, where you could do anything from basic procedures like phlebotomy, interviewing patients, to potentially, presuming you've passed relevant certifications and trainings once you're in that role, direct patient care. So it's interesting. It might alarm some of you on this call that you can actually do that without any formal clinical training, but the military is always in desperate need of clinical hands that especially have an MD behind their name, or a DO, and that have the ability to care for patients at the highest levels. And so having that a graduate school degree, whether an MD or a DO, is sort of baseline for the general medical officer role. If you go to a physician assistant school, PA school, you can also enter into a GMO type role. So at a very minimal level, those are the opportunities available to you. I would highly recommend against doing that, and I promise to get to my talk momentarily. But I entered the military towards the end of my clinical training as a subspecialist, and you have a lot more control of your destiny if you enter owing the military less in terms of, say, committed time. I'm a volunteer member of the military. They didn't pay for a lot. And so I joined them towards the end of my medical training, where I said, I just want to join and serve, and then when I'm done, I'm done, and there is no requisite payback. And the beauty of that approach is the more credentials you have behind your name. If, say, you're thinking about a clinical career, if you're thinking about a medical career, the more credentials you have by your name, the more interesting opportunities you have in the medical military medical community. I'm part of something called the Critical Care Air Transport Team at Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is a really subspecialized special operations type team based in the U.S. Air Force Command. And it's really hard to get into that unless you wait and get all the relevant training. So the most interesting opportunities come to those who join towards the end of their clinical training, have a lot of credentials behind their name, and can pick and choose to some degree what they want to do. But if you do join earlier on, especially if you, say, want to tackle debt sooner, and that's a reason why a lot of people join sooner and become GMOs. If they don't have a choice, or they want to do it for a financial reason, then that's certainly a durable path. I'm glad to talk more about that. I am mindful of time here, so I do want to jump right in, and I'm happy to answer questions as they come in as well. But so first of all, thank you again for the invitation. Sorry we got off to a little bit of a technical snafu on my end. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to leverage some data that we have been amassing over at the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, part of the University of Washington School of Medicine, to level set on where we are at when it comes to the state of the pandemic currently. It probably surprises nobody on on this call right now that COVID-19 has been devastating for not only the world's health, but for the country's health. And I like to show this weekly rank order of the leading causes of death in our country, because especially now, as we see line of sight to vacations, maybe late summer vacations, and normalcy for certainly the fall semester of 2021, hopefully, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that COVID-19 is still the leading cause of death in the United States. I mean, it's astonishing the amount of death that it has caused in the last 3 months. 3 months plus in terms of being the leading cause of death week over week for the last several months. Obviously, it's been exacting a toll on the country and the world since the beginning of 2020. But look at these numbers. I mean, and these aren't even the most dramatic numbers. These are just the most recent set of numbers. About 14,000 deaths from COVID-19 just the last week, and outpacing by several thousand ischemic heart disease, cancers of the lung tree, so the trachea, and then into your bronchi, which are a fancy way to say your bronchi are basically the airways and the air sacs that are in your lungs. It turns out heart disease and lung disease are the biggest killers generally of Americans week over week when we're not in the pandemic. But when we're in a pandemic like the current one, turns out COVID-19 is actually killing the most number of Americans still. And I think we've lost sight of that. Not everybody on this call. I don't think folks on this call have lost sight of that. But if you ask me, have certain governors lost sight of this reality? Yes, I do. I do think governors in states that will remain unnamed here, since I don't want to make this a political discussion. But when you look at this data, it's hard not to say, well, gosh, we should still be remaining vigilant while we await most of this country to get the vaccine. This is the reason, because this is still the leading cause of death for Americans across the country. And so I want to start there, that we're not out of this emergency yet. And I'm going to show some forecasts about where I think we're headed later on in the talk. But this, to me, says it all, that COVID-19 remains the leading cause of death across the United States. And it has been this reality at least since the end of October. So that's pretty astonishing. Next slide, please. I like this slide. This is also from, all these slides are from our weekly brief from IHME. And you know, what struck me about this slide was, and so this is the estimated percent of every state's population that has been infected with the virus since the very beginning. And here in Washington State, you know, even though we were the initial epicenter, turns out we're one of the best when it comes to having controlled the pandemic. So, you know, we could have been easily the worst if our leaders didn't, and across society, both public and private sector, obviously Governor Inslee and his team, our local officials here in Seattle, they acted quickly and they did the right things. So here we're seeing that less than 10% of the entire state of Washington, we think, has been exposed and infected with the coronavirus, which is surprising when you think that New York State, for example, has had some estimates suggest that 1 in 2 residents of New York State have been infected with COVID-19. That makes no comment on whether they've survived, but they've been infected, which is really quite alarming. But there's a lot of variability here. And why does this matter? I think, you know, this matters for a few reasons, because as we have these conversations about, well, who should get, you know, if you've been infected with the virus, I'm sure some of you on this call have heard, well, if you've been infected with a virus, do you need to get the COVID-19 vaccine? Answer to that is yes. But the question then will follow, do I need to get 1 shot or do I need to get 2 shots? And that matters right now, because if we're saying that, well, 1 in 2 residents potentially in New York only need 1 shot because 1 in 2 residents have been infected with this virus, then my gosh, we could potentially reallocate additional some of the supply that's gone to New York State to, say, Michigan, which is now which is experiencing what we're worried about is a 4th sort of mini surge because of these new variants that are rearing their head in places like Michigan, places like Florida. the question here is, well, because of the realities we're seeing on this slide, can we start to reallocate supply? Because maybe survivors of this virus only need one vaccine. So there are clear policy implications from what the data here on this slide are telling us. And let me be clear, for all of you on this call, right now the CDC has not made any changes on whether it's prescribing 1 dose or 2 doses if you're in line for Moderna or Pfizer, if you've previously been infected with this virus. There's no changes. So if you've been infected and you've survived an initial infection with COVID-19 sometime in the last year, you still should get the vaccine regimen as it's been prescribed for everybody else who hasn't been infected. So 2 doses for Moderna and Pfizer, 1 dose for J&J. But the reason I'm talking about this is some recent studies suggesting that if you've been infected, maybe 1 dose is enough. And that's key when you think about the context of this slide. Can I go to the next slide, please? So state of vaccine confidence. To me, it's hard not to look at a slide like this. So the legend on the right this is color coded, so sort of a heat map here. Darker shades of green show higher confidence in wanting the vaccine. Lighter colors into sort of the shades of orange reflect states where populations are being surveyed suggesting they're not as confident or they're more hesitant about wanting the vaccine. So no state clearly falls below 50% in terms of having low vaccine confidence. Here in California, or let's say on the West Coast, we're seeing high rates of vaccine confidence. So Washington State 3 and 4 at least want the vaccine or are confident about getting it when it's their turn. California is slightly higher. Massachusetts even higher. Wyoming, and my home state of Ohio, you're seeing lighter shades there, suggesting some hesitancy or whatever words you want to use. And this is the concern here, and what is going to be a key variable determining whether or not we're going to actually be able to regain some level of normalcy by July 4th, which is what President Biden has set is the goal. That by July 4th, we should experience some degree of normalcy. Well, it's all dependent on this, because it turns out we're going to have enough supply vaccine by May 1st. Those of you following the headlines, May 1st, there's going to be enough supply flooding the markets or our market here that if you want a vaccine, you should be able to get a vaccine. I recognize there are probably folks on this call here who may be younger than 16 who might not be eligible for at least the Pfizer vaccine or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So forgive me. All of you younger than 16, you're likely going to be getting the vaccine, hopefully no later than late summer, early fall, based on some promising studies that have been released, suggesting the vaccine is safe for you, and it's also very effective. But sort of zooming out to the adult population, 16 and older, this is a big deal. You've probably heard that we are in a race against time. And so part of the reason people say that is we're seeing more concerning variants pop up across the country, whether it's in California, where a double mutant, we can talk about what that means in the Q&A, are rearing their head. We're seeing this B117 variant, first identified in the United Kingdom, now pop up across the country, exponential growth. The concern here is coronaviruses like to mutate. They like to evolve. They like to change. And if we allow continued unmitigated spread in places like Florida, which went away, which got rid of the mask mandate, then we're really playing with fire here. Because if less people want to get the vaccine when it's their turn, that's going to allow for unmitigated spread, more spread. That's otherwise we could stop. That will allow the coronavirus to continue to change. And the worst case scenario here is we have we give birth to a virus that can escape all the immune response caused by a vaccine. So the antibodies produced by a vaccine, they will be rendered ineffective if we give rise to a variant that can essentially resist all antibodies. That is the concern here. So when you see a slide like this, that should worry you. It worries me. That, gosh, there's lots of states in our union where less than 70% of its citizens that are adult age want to get the vaccine. We need to do better about messaging. I know I'm getting pinged about Q&A here, so I'll try to hurry up and just zoom through the slides. And Mike, I know that I think you guys have something at 6, so I want to be respectful of time obligations here. But if I could just skip ahead real quick, I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next slide. Perfect. So this is where it all comes to roost, where we are expecting, look at the reference scenario. This is what every credible modeling organization in the country is expecting will happen, is the green line. That by the end of June into early July, we're expecting deaths and hospitalizations from this virus across the country to nadir, to approach hopefully 0, but close to 0. And then that will be a good thing, because then we can start to manage isolated spikes, isolated areas that might be hotspots. Our hospital capabilities won't be overstretched, and we'll be able to extinguish as many fires as they arise. That's what we want. That's what normalcy looks like. The occasional mini spike in a certain zip code, but not this overwhelming surge in many states across the country that we've been seeing over the last 14 months. But let me throw some caution to the wind here. There's a worst case scenario whereby the beginning of July, we're still experiencing 1,000 deaths, 100,000 cases a day. And that happens if we see hesitancy to the vaccine continue to plateau or increase in key states. That happens if states start to open up early. That happens if all of us start start to travel without masks, if we start to let our guard down. That's what happens, because then it gives the variants a competitive advantage to continue to change, to continue to transmit themselves, and to continue to cause a lot of havoc. So that is the concern here. That's what we're racing against, this contingency here that nobody wants to deal with. Next slide, please. Next slide. I'll skip this in the interest of time, and I think it's just I want to go over to the a quick word here. These are all the inputs. Sometimes we get questions at IHME. Well, how are you determining these forecasts? What are your inputs into these statistical models? Well, these are a key piece of our modeling forecasts at the state level. So all 50 states across the United States are here on the y-axis. For the top x-axis there, you'll see the various policy considerations we account for when modeling what we think might happen over time in terms of cases, expected deaths due to this virus at the state level. Lots of stuff going on here. Are schools closed? Are they open? What about limits on indoor gathering? What about stay-at-home orders? What about what's happening with restaurants? Are we allowing restaurants to open for indoor dining or not? Depending on a state's policy, that's going to impact their trajectory in terms of what to expect from their respective, what they can expect from this pandemic, given their policy considerations and what they've implemented, what they decide not to implement. So just want to emphasize that. That's a key input. And I think finally, last slide. Okay, as we enter into the Q&A, this is where my clinical world abuts against my media advocacy role, or whatever this sort of odd space, at least I feel like I find myself in, which is how do you communicate difficult scientific topics to the lay public at scale and do so in a way that's effective? Also, how do you wrestle with really difficult policy debates so that we can start doing the right thing by the way of the people, ensuring that we aren't losing trust, or that we're gaining trust, and that ultimately we're heading in the right direction? You know, I think it's important for all of us, especially as you're coming up through the ranks, as you're thinking about careers in STEM, whether it's basic science or whether it's clinical medicine, whether it's health policy. There has never been a more important time to enter a science-related professional career, in my view. This is going to, science and public health will dominate your future. They're going to dominate our entire world for the next many decades. No one is going to forget the last year. This will dominate every single country's priority planning for how they allocate budgets, what policies they're going to put into place, who they're going to hire into government. So this is a great time to be interested in STEM careers and to be really thinking along these lines. But I think you have to keep your eyes open and think about ways in which science really abuts against or conflicts sometimes with existing policy, with issues of social justice, with issues of just gaining the public's trust. And so I put a few things here that just to give you an example of how I've really struggled with this. And for example, and not to court controversy on this call here, but I think we all want schools to be reopened for in-person learning. How do we do that safely? I offered an opinion here that I thought was evidence-based, but some people disagree with me. When it comes to building vaccine confidence, I think we've done a terrible job communicating this to the American public. We're talking way too much in terms of percentages, percent efficacy of this vaccine versus that vaccine, asymptomatic protection versus symptomatic protection. It's so darn confusing. But a simple picture here, in my view, is the clear take-home point that we need to be hammering home in people's minds, that all these vaccines will prevent progression of serious illness, prevent severe pneumonia, and that's all that matters. But we're not saying that. I think we're saying it now, but we weren't saying it a month ago. And then other issues of race, social justice, and how we are distributing vaccines. I mean, these are really critical topics that, as you consider a career in a science-related field, you're going to find yourself wrestling with yourself. And so I can continue to yap away. I want to be mindful that you have something at 6 o'clock, and I want to make sure that there's enough time for Q&A. So thank you for letting me make a few introductory comments. Happy to take questions.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for that eye-opening talk, and thank you for your patience with the technical issues, and thank you to all the attendees for that as well. We are going to transition into the Q&A now, and moderators will field questions in the chat for you and speak them. So the first question we have here in the chat is, what can normal people do, as well as STEM professionals and doctors, what can they do to combat internet misinformation about the vaccines and coronavirus?
Well, all of you, in my view, are, I mean, you're the next generation of leaders for this country. And we need, especially I've noticed that there's a lot of misinformation and hesitancy, whatever you want to call it, amongst younger demographics. So individuals that you can reach in ways in which our leading scientists and health leaders perhaps are less well positioned to be able to reach, right? You can talk to to other younger individuals in ways in which it's going to be harder for myself and others to do. So that's where leaning into storytelling, in my opinion, a lot of people on this call probably know somebody or know a family, or maybe you've been personally impacted by this pandemic in terms of losing a loved one or a friend. Leaning into that storytelling, making it personal, and trying to make it real for somebody who might be believing misinformation or who might be thinking the wrong way about this pandemic, I think is key. So all of you are effective messengers and are well positioned to counteract something that I think we're all concerned about here in public health, a rising tide of misinformation targeted towards younger demographics. And so the best way to combat that is to actually have an army of well-informed younger individuals to spread good information. So I hope you do that. I hope you lean into storytelling. I'm happy to help guide in terms of providing better evidence if you feel like you need it. A lot's out there on the CDC website, on WHO. I think even on if you curate a good list of people to follow on social media, I'm not saying you got to follow me, but follow your, if you are on social media, on any of the platforms, generally speaking, I've actually found those to be one of the most trustworthy sources of information right now in this pandemic. There are ways to curate good information and to spread it, so I hope you do. I'm wondering if maybe in the interest of time, should I just go ahead and start. Mike, should I just go ahead and push through some of these Q&As that I'm seeing?
Absolutely. You can just, if you see a question you like, you can answer it. Go ahead. But we do have moderators as well.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to take away from the moderator's job. Please.
Yes, so Dr. Gupta, we have another interesting question that caught my eye. How is the country adapting and changing their medical department to protect the U.S. from other diseases like COVID-19 in the future?
God, it's a great question. Yeah, I can say, having served on the Biden-Harris transition, that we have great leaders that are now staffing a revitalized National Security Council global health security team. So there is a team that previously existed under the Obama administration that has now been revitalized, staffed by my former mentor, Rebecca Katz, and amongst others who are thinking about that exact issue. So how can we better prepare, not just better respond? And so that's going to be, it's multimodal. It's whole of government, whole of society. I just participated in a summit with the Red Cross, in my Amazon role, where we talked about ways in which the private sector can help bolster the public sector when it comes to preparedness. And so I think there's a few different things that I know the administration is thinking about. One of which is, how do we better leverage the private sector to foster innovation, say in mask development. HHS, Health and Human Services, just issued a call for proposals to actually help fund the development of and the scaling ultimately of the best new innovation in mask wearing. So you have the combination of high quality in terms of its filtration, so you're protected from all the aerosols around you, well fitting, and recyclability, meaning you're not throwing away the mask every day after you use it. We don't have that type of innovation right now. We have one of these guys. I mean, I can say this as a pulmonologist. We have N95s, but I have to throw this away after a full day's use. This is very high quality, but it's a pain to wear. Whenever I'm in the ICU, it's a pain to wear. Nobody likes to wear it. I suspect if I gave all of you on this call an N95, you'd probably go and find a place where you could have some private time and take it off, because it's really, if you're not used to wearing it, people don't like to wear it constantly for 8 hours or for the duration of a shift. So we need innovation in masking. I think we need more tabletop exercises where we have public hospitals working with, in my case, I would say my unit at Joint Base Lewis McChord. So we have good synchrony between military assets, public health hospitals that are level 1 trauma centers that have a lot of capability to respond to emergencies, and the private sector. We need to have that muscle memory of bringing in the best across sectors, working in sync. We need to know what each part of society can bring and what we can leverage, so that when there is the next crisis, we're ready and we're not trying to make it up as we go. And so that's what the Biden administration is really focused on: innovation, masking, tabletop exercises, better development of rapid point of care testing. All of you, I mean, I have all these demos right next to me. There's going to be a sea change in how we test ourselves for infectious diseases. I don't get paid by this company, so I'm not peddling you guys a consumer product. But I mean, there's been amazing innovation in testing where basically you could test yourself and then get a test result, and the test itself is Bluetooth connected to your phone, and you can get a result within 15 minutes. That didn't exist a year ago. And so they're trying to scale higher quality over-the-counter tests that test for influenza, COVID-19, you name it. But those are the types of innovations we need, and we need more of, and that's what you're going to see. And then lastly, I'll say better funding our departments of public health across the country, both at the local and state level. You can't have contact tracing if you don't have contact tracers. You need people who want to go into these careers, who are adequately trained, who are adequately compensated. So they're really focusing in on that as well. Sorry, I know that was a long response.
Hi, Dr. Gupta. COVID-19 has a new, more infectious variant. How do you think this would affect the reopening of schools and businesses around the country?
I hope it doesn't impacted all that much, other than cause us to feel like there's urgency to really pushing ahead with our excellent vaccination pace. So what we know right now are that all the vaccines are effective against all the variants that we know currently exist in keeping you out of the hospital. So even though there are variants of concern arising in California, and probably here in Washington State, we just don't know it. There's just a lot we don't know because we don't have the type of genomic sequencing capabilities that we need at scale to really have a true sense of what's happening in real time with respect to new variants. My sense here is that hospitalizations are coming down across the country in most cases, maybe Michigan aside. And that is really encouraging. That means the vaccines are working against the variants we know exist and the ones that we don't know exist. And as long as we continue to vaccinate, we're seeing that means that we're keeping people out of the hospital. The second that does not prove to be true, and we start to see hospitalization numbers continue to climb, then we should be really worried, because then that tells us there's a variant that exists that is resistant to the vaccines. But luckily that hasn't happened yet. So and I'll lastly say that the key here is we also think the vaccines protect against transmission of the virus, meaning for the last few months, there's been this thought, well, hey, I can get the vaccine, but if I get exposed to the virus after I'm fully vaccinated, there's a potential I could still get infected, be asymptomatic, and then expose somebody who's yet to be vaccinated and give them the disease, if that makes sense. You could still be a carrier for COVID, even if you're not ending up in the ICU with COVID pneumonia. Turns out, it looks like the vaccines actually protect really well against transmission of the virus. So that's fantastic news. I don't think it's going to do it perfectly, but it's really, really good news. So it's just, the key message here is we need to reduce case transmission, because coronaviruses like to mutate, and the longer we allow it to change and to mutate in our ecosystems, the greater the likelihood there will be a variant that arises that will be resistant to a vaccine. And that is basically going to result in us starting back in square one. And we don't want, nobody wants that.
Hi, Dr. Gupta. Sorry, we have another question. Someone had asked, how would you combat the disconnect between medical professionals and the politicians who do not view COVID-19 as a priority?
Well, gosh, I felt like I spent the last 14 months in that space, and that has been a very frustrating space. And I'll respond. I could spend an hour talking about that. This is what I'll say for all of you that are in the beginning of your career, thinking about college. I'm sure to a lot of you, I'm seeing some questions about college applications. My advice to you would be, this is not going to go away. Misinformation, I can never say this word, the politicization of science and health is here to stay. And for those who want to be physicians, my advice to you is do everything you can to diversify your skill set until you reach medical school. So for me, I majored in political science in college. I then got a dual degree in international relations and communications. So I was ready for the moment where, I didn't expect this moment to occur, but there was a skill set there that I tried to develop that wasn't just purely how do I take good care of patients? How can I speak to people? How can I was really interested in better scientific communication. Not the way we learn scientific communication in graduate school is not the way people want to be spoken to when you're thinking about it from the perspective of the general public. There is a huge inability. I think there's been a lot of difficulty for leading scientists to communicate concepts simply to people, which has allowed people that are bad actors to really feed off of that and politicize things that they shouldn't be politicizing. So instead of delving into kind of the frustration piece here, I want to be forward thinking for all of you. Diversify how you approach your career, what you major in, building a diverse skill set. Even if you want to be an MD one day or a PhD one day, focus in on building a diverse set of skills, because it's going to make you unique, and you're going to have greater options down the road if you want to say pivot to policy, or if you want to pivot to something else.
All right, Dr. Vin Gupta, our next question is, what might come of vaccine inequality, not just in America, but in the world?
Kate, well, you know, that is I think the big fear here is, and I'll share a link to with you guys offline, but the Council on Foreign Relations recently did an excellent piece on your exact question, which is that turns out 8 out of 10 or 80% of vaccines have gone to 10 countries, and the rest of the world has the other 20%. And you know what that means, Kate? That just means we are allowing coronavirus to, as a global society, to run amok in very populous countries in this world, and it's creating for a very dangerous situation where, for example, we're going to experience some degree of normalcy by end of June, early July, per some of the graphs I showed you guys earlier. But Canada is shutting down. Vancouver, not far from us, just had an outbreak of a very concerning variant that affected their hockey team. I mean, and some young people are in hospitals. Brazil, the numbers are terrible. India, and of course, most of Western Europe is in lockdown again. None of that changes just because we're back to normal and having July 4th barbecues. So vaccine inequitable access to vaccines at the global level will just mean that we're going to be dealing with COVID-19 to some degree for the foreseeable future. And even if it's not impacting our day-to-day or our week-to-week, and we're able to go out to restaurants or have vacations, the threat of a variant that will rehash this whole pandemic is going to be very much top of mind. And that's the big concern here, that if the world doesn't get vaccinated, then this is whatever problems arise in whatever far-flung part of the corner of the world is going to be our problem before long. And let me prove it to you. That there was this double mutant that was first detected in India maybe a week ago. It was just detected yesterday by Stanford scientists in the Bay Area. We are a global society, and so any global problem is ultimately a local problem. So that's the impact of vaccine inequality.
All right, hello. We have another question, which is, how do you think we can overcome the educational challenges that the pandemic has brought upon high school students? For example, setbacks with applying to colleges or taking the SAT.
Oh gosh, you know, that is such a good question. I'm not, I can't say I'm a huge expert in that space other than to say I empathize with all of you. If there's a silver lining here, Carolyn, I would say that I'm glad you guys aren't in college, because, and that this is the worst of this will have passed by the time you arrive in college, because those who I know who are in college are really are upset that they've lost a year or two of their college experience doing virtual learning in some cases. You know, my advice to all of you would be, these setbacks are temporary. I know they're frustrating. And I know this is, you know, I remember the college admissions process from 20 some odd years ago. It's stressful. All of you are obviously incredibly talented and bright. You're going to go to the colleges of your choosing. All of that said, I really mean this. You're all in this STEM fair for a reason. You have some interest in science. Really, I can't drive home. I mean, I sit on an admissions committee for a medical school and a few other committees. So, you know, I'm part of the recruitment process. And I see what really distinguishes people. And it's taking time through college, maybe taking a year or two off. My alma mater, you can actually, after acceptance, you can take a year off and do community service work in a few sites globally. And a lot of those individuals end up getting Rhodes scholarships down the road. And so the more you invest in taking your time and exploring your interests and diverse skill sets versus just going from point A to point B as quickly as possible, trust me, it pays off. Not only will you feel more fulfilled, but then you know, of course, we're all thinking about the next step. It's going to make you even more interesting for that next step. So I don't know if that's helpful advice. Probably have heard it a million times over, but as somebody that actively sits on a few admissions committees, I'm telling you, take your time.
Hello, Dr. Gupta. Okay, so another question is, how can a 15-year-old volunteer for vaccine drives?
Oh gosh. Well, right now, this is what I would do. I would encourage anybody who wants to volunteer, and forgive me if I don't respond right away, but in my Amazon rule, we've been putting on mass vaccine sites with Virginia Mason. Some of you may have seen that in our downtown locations. Right now, we've gated who can volunteer to having some sort of clinical training, but that's rapidly going to change as we have more sites, both here and then in other sites across the country. So I would just encourage you to please flag your interest to me. My email is vgupta@uw.edu. That's my University of Washington email. And then I will just keep a running list. And as I see eligibility for volunteer slots change, I will absolutely make sure I pass it along if it's okay with you. So that's my promise to you. But forgive me if you don't hear from me right away. And I don't know if you have to go somewhere, but I want to make sure I give you back the time. If all of you don't have to run to something else, I'm happy to stay on until 6:15 to answer questions. But I'm also happy to bid you farewell if you have to head off somewhere else.
Hello, Dr. Gupta. We have another question. How has the distribution of the vaccine affect underdeveloped countries, and what is the best way for us to advocate for those who cannot?
Well, it's not just underdeveloped countries. It's really just four countries maybe that have done really well: Chile, Israel, the United Kingdom, and the United States. It has been a struggle essentially everywhere else, and maybe I haven't been completely comprehensive there. South Korea has done a really excellent job as well, and I'm probably leaving out a few. But the majority of countries have done not as well as we would have anticipated. So even well-resourced health systems like France and Canada, Italy, are really struggling, and that's why you're seeing the ICUs outside of Paris are surging. I mean, it is astonishing what's happening. It's alarming to me as an intensivist. So with all of that said, and of course, then you look at countries across the global south, India, Brazil. I mean, the death tolls are climbing. They're really, this is not getting better in any of these places. And so what can we do? People that are powerful right now in government are relegated to writing op-eds in the New York Times. I mean, there's only so much policy they can shift, and they've turned into advocates. Thought leaders across the country have turned into advocates using whatever platforms they had. So, I mean, one thought here is you just continue obviously to use your voice in whatever way you feel comfortable to talk about vaccine equity as an issue of national security. Fundamentally, people now are going to be a little bit more, I think you're going to see that there's going to be nationalism when it comes to the desire for vaccination or reaching herd immunity. People are tired. Country leaders recognize that. So they're going to say, you know what, I got to get my people vaccinated first before we worry about folks elsewhere. And so there is going to be a nationalistic trend here because people want normalcy. In spite of that, I think we have to message on the fact that there is no normalcy unless the world gets immunized, not just some of us. You're not going to be able, in my view, you are not going to be able to safely travel to Western Europe, nor should you, or to that safari in Southern Africa, or down to Rio. I mean, there are going to be limitations, or even up to Toronto or Vancouver. I don't know about you guys. I love Vancouver. We're not going to be able to cross the border. I mean, that's going to be our new normal for who knows how long. That's not normal. And so vaccine equity is a key piece of that, right? It's a huge piece of that.
Hi, Dr. Gupta. We had a question asking how this current pandemic will affect our future prevention and how we will prepare for future pandemics.
Well, we are having conversations now that let's just be honest, we haven't had these conversations before. We haven't had conversations about how do we make tests for infectious diseases over the counter to be used at home. We haven't had conversations about masks being better fitting, high quality for us all. We just haven't. I mean, these are conversations that prior to January of 2020, I didn't ever envision having with the general population. So I think that's a start, that we're asking the right questions. We're now investing in a future preparedness response in ways that I think we haven't over the last few years. So it's going to be better. It's not going to be enough. And so we need more. I mean, you know, we have 18 aircraft carriers that cost many billions each to develop. And here we are talking about a few $1 billion for pandemic preparedness to fund this new team within the National Security Council. And that was a big to-do. And yet, when it comes to conventional military threats, here we are, you know, no cost is too much. And yet biological threats, natural or otherwise, always are given sort of second billing here as a major policy consideration to plan around. I hope this pandemic has changed people's minds, at least the minds of our leaders, that even if it might seem existential, that there is nothing like a respiratory pandemic in particular that can cause our way of life around the world to change instantaneously. 9/11, I mean, I'll say this, my first day in college was actually September 11th. I was 40 minutes south of New York City. And 9/11 obviously was disruptive for this country. I don't even know if any of you were born on 9/11. Right? No, I don't even think anybody. 2003 is probably the earliest anybody on this call was born. I don't. Yep. Adriano is giving me a nod, so I'm going to take that as a yes. So none of you most of you probably have not lived through 9/11, but that to me is the type of event that defined my college career and thereafter. But it defines some of when you think about the global community of nations, it didn't impact every nation in the world in the same way, 9/11. This pandemic has impacted everybody across ages in ways that we'll never forget. And so I do think that there's going to be a lot more investments from governments across the world in a better response. There's going to be hopefully more move towards multilateralism, towards a truly functioning global society of nations, towards a better and more well-equipped WHO, but it's going to take time.
Hey, Dr. Gupta. So we have time for one last question, and
Sure.
The question was, what advice would you give to a high school student who wants to get into the medical field?
Gosh, luckily you have some time. So college is going to be an excellent time to one, make sure you want to do it. So I would make sure you want to do it. It's a long, arduous path. And this is my bias, and you should seek many opinions, not just a few, many. The most fulfilling careers in medicine, in my view, are where you're a clinician part of the time, and then you're leveraging that perspective to inform policy. And because every policy problem, in my view, that exists right now for our country has a health lens. And there's no better and more credible arbiter of change and leader, whether it's climate change, whether it's gun violence, whether it's, gosh, you name it, obviously pandemic response, that doesn't need the voice of a clinician. And so that's where I really am hammering home to all of you. I studied international relations and communications in college, but was planning on becoming a physician. And maybe you want to be a basic scientist. Maybe you want to be a geneticist. Maybe you want to be a teacher that's focused on STEM. Who knows what? But I would push all of you to actually study something that's not directly related to what you're going to be studying for the rest of your career in detail in college. One, you're going to be happier for because you will have developed a more diverse skill set that will, trust me, come in use in ways that are unexpected, number one. But then number two, will make you more competitive when it comes to writing a personal statement for graduate school, whether it's med school or you name it. So that's my advice. If you're thinking about a career in medicine specifically, diversify your skill set. You'll be much happier you did for a variety of reasons.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta and the moderators for that Q&A. Next up, we have our panelists for the biology, medical, and chemistry panel. Each panelist will give an introduction of themselves and their research, followed by an open Q&A. Dr. Gupta, you are welcome to stay for the panel. Our first panelist introduction is Dr. Nelson, so please take it away.
Hello. Can we just get a confirmation that you can see my slide here?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, first off, thank you very much for the invitation to be here and to be a part of this panel. I always enjoy these types of conversations that we can have. And so just by way of introduction, my name is Al-Shakim Nelson. My background, my father is Black, my mom is Japanese, and I'm a first-generation college student and also the first in my family to get a PhD. I actually got a PhD in chemistry. My career path has not been very direct, but I went to college at Pomona College, which is in Southern California, and then I went to UCLA for graduate school and to get a PhD in chemistry. And then I went to Caltech for 1 year to be a postdoctoral fellow for Bob Grubbs. And from there, I decided to go into industry. So I was a research scientist for IBM. There's a research facility in San Jose known as Almaden Research Center. And I was a research scientist there for 10 years. And the type of research that we did was related to semiconductors and the technologies required to make storage devices and microchips. And then I decided I wanted a career change. And since 2015, I've been a professor in the Department of Chemistry, where my group works on 3D printing. So I know that this is a career panel on STEM, so I thought I would just make a few notes on why I chose to focus on STEM. And as I mentioned earlier, for me, it was not a very direct path. And going into college, I kind of felt like I liked working in science, but wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But the one thing I knew I wanted was a job. And I felt like, well, if I stuck with STEM, then at least I would have an opportunity to have a job after graduating. But in college, I also had the opportunity to get involved in research over the summers. And what I found was that I really enjoyed science. So it wasn't just doing science so that I can be employed. Is getting paid to do research or getting paid to do science was seemed like a great opportunity. So just a few notes about what we do now in my lab. So we focus on 3D printing, and if we look at where printing technologies were 30 years ago, some of you may have seen these dot matrix printers. They're very slow. The resolution was not very good. They were very loud when they printed. And you compare that to the technologies that we see now, these laser printers that are available in many offices and homes today, printing in color, printing photos in high resolution, but also we're talking about printing other materials as well. So now we're talking about printing devices like electronic devices. And so what do I expect 30 years from now? I expect 30 years from now that we will see 3D printers distributed through offices, through homes, through businesses, through hospitals as well. And I believe that this will be just a very standard and common way for the production of three-dimensional objects. Now, just in this last slide here, then, just to give you a sense of how a chemist might approach 3D printing, you might think of 3D printing, but there's actually three different parts of this complex world. The first is what we would describe as the hardware, and this is the 3D printer itself. And so an engineer, a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer, for example, may build these 3D printers, and there's all different types of 3D printers that you could build today. But a computer scientist or a programmer may focus more on the software and the modeling. And so here you have the opportunity to essentially create any virtual object you want, right, in the virtual space. And with 3D printing, you can now transfer that virtual object into the into reality, or into the three-dimensional world. But as a chemist, I think most about the materials. Right? So what are we 3D printing with, and what is it that, what sort of properties do you want of your 3D printed object? And if you look at what folks are using now, they're using sand, concrete, sugar, and also what I would describe as the plastics of yesteryear. So these are plastics that were developed many years ago, 30 to 50 years ago. And this is where I see the opportunity to use chemistry to develop new materials, to create new opportunities in the field, whether we're talking about applications for medicine, to be able to 3D print tissues, or to create biodegradable or compostable plastics that can have complex 3D geometries. So with that, I'll stop sharing, and I look forward to the conversation that we'll have.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson, for that introduction. Next up, we have Dr. Lopez.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I have to figure out how to get myself on the screen there.
You're all good, Dr. Lopez, and ready to
You can see me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. So I'm Jose Lopez. I don't have any slides. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Bloodworks Northwest, which is our regional blood center. I'm also a professor at the University of Washington in the departments of medicine. I'm a hematologist, a blood doctor, and I'm adjunct professor in biochemistry, mechanical engineering, and pathology. I'm from New Mexico, the northern part of the state, high in the mountains. I grew up in a village on a farm that my family had been in that part of the state since the late 1500s. So they were the initial explorers that went in there. And it's a rural area. And so I grew up kind of on a farm around animals. We had a garden, we grew most of our food, and we had orchards, and there was wilderness all around the place. So I was always surrounded by nature. And I think that's what really made me interested in science. I also was really very interested in kind of the idea of exploration. I would read about explorers, and I was always fascinated by that. And I remember in 4th grade, so this is a long time ago, that I was reading about these hypothetical particles called tachyons, that they were supposed to be particles that could travel faster than the speed of light. Well, I really didn't understand anything about that or how that could be possible. Obviously, that takes advanced physics, but what I did understand was that I remember reading that scientists were considering them, and I thought that idea, being a scientist, those people must really be something special. And so I was always really interested in that, and as I said, I grew up in a place with lots of nature. In fact, there was even a stream that went through our backyard that was full of trout, and I would go and just watch them. I would hide by the bank of the stream and just see how they behaved. In high school, I got the opportunity to do a summer science program in the college that I eventually attended, which is called New Mexico Tech. And I got very, very interested. I went to New Mexico Tech. I studied chemistry, and I loved chemistry, especially organic chemistry. And I had the opportunity while there to actually work in a lab, and I did three 3 programs outside of college in labs. One was at Argonne National Laboratory near Chicago, and I did 2 summers at Dow Chemical Company. So I was thinking to myself, what can I do? What kind of thing can I do science but still live wherever I want to? So very naively, I thought I can do medicine. And I was really interested in medicine because of kind of the learning about the wonders of the human body. Well, I did medicine. I went through it. I was, but I was surprised that many of my medical school colleagues were not that interested in the basic aspects of medicine, about learning the biochemistry and immunology, etc. So I continued my interest in science, and I came up to Seattle to do a residency. While a resident, I saw a patient that had a profound clotting disorder that was super interesting. So I started studying that, and I ended up going into the laboratory and studying blood. And so I study actually how blood clotting starts, and maybe if I can share a little bit, I'll just show you a couple of slides. So about 20 years ago, right before some of you were born, my colleagues and I found we were looking at so there are these cells called endothelial cells that line blood vessels, and we figured out that we could activate them and perfuse platelets over them, and we could see these beads on a string-like structures, and it turned out that these were this protein called von Willebrand factor that comes out of the endothelial cells and can bind these cells called platelets. And I'll just show you a little movie about this. So in this movie, along with my engineering colleagues, we made blood vessels in the laboratory that we could then perfuse with blood. And so what we did was we took a blood vessel that had this kind of geometry, and we perfused into it a substance that will activate the endothelial cells to secrete that von Willebrand factor. And we had labeled platelets. So these platelets are these little cells in your blood that normally stop you from bleeding. And what we saw was this, that the endothelial cells would dump out all of this stuff that the platelets would get stuck to. And it would go all along the blood vessels. And there's an enzyme that's actually coming along here, and it's cutting this stuff off. If you inhibit that enzyme, all of these blood vessels will get occluded. Well, the interesting thing is that this process, and here it's just the strands of that von Willebrand factor in the platelets, and I'll stop sharing. But the interesting thing about that is that this process is probably involved in the microvascular blood clotting that's being observed in COVID. So very happy to be here, and looking forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez, for that introduction. We'll get to Q&A right after our next speaker, which is Ms. Khalil. Please take it away. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? I'm good. Okay, awesome. My name is Munira Khalil. I'm a professor in the chemistry department, and I'm a colleague of Al Nelson's. And right now I'm the chair of the chemistry department at the University of Washington. I'm delighted to be here. I'll just sort of walk you through how I got here, and a little bit of what we do, and I'll try to, and then I'll be happy to take questions. So I grew up in India, and nobody was a scientist in my family. I had no idea what a scientist did. And but I was very much interested in how people work and how social interactions work, and how this idea of how sort of microscopic interactions amongst people can sometimes lead to big changes. And it's a theme that I have carried on in my research, and I think it's really makes me very excited about chemistry, because this is exactly what we all like to study, is how do we get to introducing, how do we go from atoms moving around, what Richard Feynman called the wiggling and jiggling of atoms, right, to something that gives us biological function, macroscopic function, right? So when I look back, my main interaction with science when all through high school was that I played a scientist in a play, right? I had I really had no idea. And then I came to the United States to study for undergraduate studies, and I was at a liberal arts college at Colgate University. I double majored in English and chemistry, and I heard that you could get paid to do research over the summer. So I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Much better to do that than some other job that I would have done. So I applied. And I got this money to do research, and I fell in love with chemistry. I just, I love being in lab. I love troubleshooting. I love trying to figure out why things worked, why something did not work. And I really enjoyed working with people to try to solve problems. And that then propelled me to and this was before the days of email, so I actually wrote letters to faculty members across other universities in the US because I was interested in femtosecond spectroscopy. And so I'll explain what that is. This was a field that was just getting started, and I had read a paper in one of my classes about it. And so femtosecond is a millionth of a billionth of a second, so 10 to the minus 15 seconds. It's if you think about a vibration and the periodicity of a vibration, that's the kind of time scale you're talking about. And so I wrote to all of these professors, these famous professors. One of them went on to win the Nobel Prize, and I said, hey, I would love to come and work in your lab over the summer. And lo and behold, to my surprise, all of them wrote back. Some of them said, hey, I don't have space. Some of them said, yes, definitely. You're welcome to come and spend a summer. And so I did. I spent a summer at Boulder, Colorado. And that was my introduction to how science was done at a big research university. And it was a very valuable experience because it demonstrated to me how a group of undergraduate students, graduate students, postdocs work together, right, to solve important problems. So I decided to pursue a PhD in chemistry, where I continued to work on ultrafast spectroscopy. Spectroscopy is the use of light to study matter. So you're sort of, tickling the atoms in a sample, and then you're probing what's happening to them. And then after that, I decided to do a postdoc at a big user facility at Berkeley. So this is trying to understand X-ray experiments. And this was an introduction again to a very different kind of science. A big science at a big facilities. Dr. Lopez just talked about doing work at Argonne National Lab. These are big national labs, very different kind of work that you do in an academic setting. And I really enjoyed that experience as well. And then finally, that brought me to the University of Washington. And I'm so grateful for what I do. I have as I tell people, I have the privilege for asking questions and being able to answer them, very basic science questions, and then to really work with a wonderful group of students, staff, colleagues to pursue this. So thanks, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Khalil, for that introduction. And next we have Dr. Nadia. So please take it away.
Hello, I'm Nadia. I'm not a doctor yet, but I am an undergraduate at the University of Washington, and I'm in my senior year of my degree, and majoring in bioengineering, and I'm minoring in bioethics. And I'll be going to medical school at UW Medicine this fall. I first got interested in medicine in high school when I worked with elderly patients in home health care, and I was really intimidated about interacting with them, but I started to really enjoy that type of patient interaction. And then I decided to major in bioengineering because I was really interested in kind of the future of medicine and innovations that were occurring in the field. And as I started to volunteer in hospitals and shadow healthcare professionals, I started realizing that there are so many things that affect a person's health. Like one example was I was at an oncology clinic, and a woman was talking about how she knew she had a lump in her breast for a very long time, but she couldn't afford to take a day off without pay to come in and get it checked. And that like hit me like a truck. I was like, oh my God, there are so many things that contribute to your health. And so I started to get interested in ethics. And I did some research in ethics and bioengineering, and I started realizing how much public policy makes a difference to people's health. And so I did an internship at a United States Senator's office, and I learned a lot about healthcare policy making. And I did a lot of work with refugee populations, and not just medical work, like tutoring and also medical work in a refugee field hospital. And yeah, I'm currently completing my engineering capstone project where I'm designing a device to help collect research data on studying neurodegenerative diseases. And so I'm looking forward to completing that this spring. Yeah, and that's my journey and how I got here.
Thank you for that introduction. And next up is Nandita, and following her introduction, we will have the Q&A. So Nandita, please take it away.
Hi, can everybody see me? Not sure. Okay. Hi, so I'm Nandita. I am a senior here at the University of Washington. I'm majoring in biochemistry, and I'm currently minoring in global health and chemistry. So just a little bit about myself. So I was born in India, but I grew up in Singapore and Finland, and then I got here to the United States about 5 years ago, and I completed my high school here, and here I am at the University of Washington. So why I decided to go into biochemistry was because I really enjoyed learning biology and chemistry in high school. I really was fortunate to have really cool teachers who were super passionate about the subject, and so I wanted to pursue that further in college. So what biochemistry is essentially is that you learn about the chemical processes in the body. You learn about metabolism, you learn about how certain cellular functions essentially teach you how a living organism functions overall. And I thought that was really cool. I really liked learning about the health aspect of it. And so in my sophomore year of college, I was involved in research at a biochemistry lab where I did fruit fly research. And while I thought that was really cool, I wanted to look at health from a more community-based perspective. And so I decided to minor in global health as well. And that was really cool because it opened up my eyes to how health is currently, or how a lot of underrepresented populations are dealing with a lot of different health issues that are going on right now. And I wanted to look into that further. So right now I am also involved in a club that's called a UW Chat. And it stands for Community Health Action Team. And we look at accessibility of information regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I'm a content creator for that. And yeah, I think this major as a whole gives you a lot of different important life skills, such as problem solving skills that you can apply to a lot of different majors and a lot of different career paths. So yeah.
Thank you everyone for those introductions. We will now transition into the Q&A portion. We have received questions when you registered, so we will ask those questions first, but please still ask questions in the chat. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. Our first question is for any panelist. How did you choose which field of medicine to enter, given the wide range of possible careers?
I guess probably I'm one of the medical people here. How did I choose which field? First of all, I chose internal medicine because internal medicine seemed to be the specialty where people were exploring the physiology and pathophysiology of the diseases. So you were thinking about what causes, say, this lung disease, or what causes this infectious disease. And while I was doing internal medicine, of course, I saw patients across many different subspecialties. And it was during that experience that I saw a patient with a disorder that I'll just describe the disorder really quickly. This was a young woman, 18 years old, I believe, who was completely healthy and got sick. And within 4 days, she was on death's doorstep. And she was certainly going to die if I hadn't been lucky enough to have just read about this disease and made the diagnosis, and she got treatment. But it was a disease where the entire body, the small blood vessels clot. And nobody knew why that happened. It was something in the blood that appeared to make these platelets stick, but nobody knew. I've been studying that. Now we know everything about that. But that was basically the patient who led me into the particular field that I worked in.
Okay, my mic.
You're muted.
You are muted.
The joys of technology. All right, I should be unmuted now. So this is for Dr. Nelson and Dr. Khalil. So do you have any advice for getting into colleges for chemistry, and what can you use a chemistry degree for?
I can go first, Munir, or unless you would like to. Sure, okay. Yeah, well, as far as chemistry degrees, it's such a degree. It's a degree that's offered at a number of universities, and if you are going to college with the idea that you want to come out with a chemistry degree, then what I would focus on are research opportunities, right? And so what opportunities are they going to provide you as an undergraduate student to be able to go and work in a professor's laboratory? And as far as what you can do with a degree, it's entirely up to you. There's so many different ways that you can go. Some get a chemistry degree because they want to go to medical school. Some want to become a chemist, so you can work in industrial factories, or you can work in an analytical laboratory. There are people who actually decide not to use their chemistry to do research or for any sort of chemical production, but I have friends who've become attorneys, so they go to law school afterward. And you as a chemist, you can provide a very different perspective on things relative to others who might have an English or communications background. So I would say that it's a very versatile major.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't have too much to add from what Al said. I agree with the fact that almost every school offers chemistry. So you'll soon find that you'll be trying to figure out what subfield of chemistry you're most interested in, because they're just so diverse. I also think that I'm biased, but I think chemistry is the central science. So that does mean that it's very easy to make connections to things that are happening in physics and biology and material science, and so one could go into all of those areas as well. I've had graduate students who have gone on to science policy, graduate students who have become data scientists after leaving with a PhD in chemistry. So I think the skills that you learn really translate into a lot of different fields.
All right, hello.
Can I just say something real quick? I got an undergraduate degree in chemistry, and I still use that chemistry because I do biochemistry and I do blood chemistry. And chemistry is a wonderful field. That's all I can say.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dr. Lopez. This next question is for any of the panelists. How have you combated demotivation while you were studying or in your fields while you're working? What really got you through the hard parts?
I can answer as a college student. Kind of going through it right now, I think there are a lot of ups and downs of things like applying to labs and not getting responses, and having to juggle schools and extracurriculars and clubs, and do all of the deciding what you really enjoy and narrowing things down. I think combating demotivation for me had to do a lot with making good friends and good connections in the fields that I was also working in, and having people around me who were going through a lot of similar things with pursuing an engineering degree and pursuing medicine. And I think having people around you who are going through something similar, or people that you can rely on and talk to about your experiences, and also knowing what resources are there for you when you're feeling demotivated. So like I know UW, for example, has a lot of different resources that are there for you to go and talk to people and figure out how you can rearrange your schedule to make it more doable for you. So I think when I'm motivated, the best thing I've done has been reach out to people and reach out into my community, so that when I'm demotivated, there's that kind of network I have to help remind me that I do love everything that I'm currently doing.
I mean, I can add a little bit there too. Yeah, so I would just echo everything that was just said. It's really important to create that strong network, especially a peer network. When you go off to college and you're moving away from your family, you don't get the same level of support as you might at home. And I think the one other thing I would add is that you do also have to build confidence in yourself, right? There will be times where things will get very challenging, but I think when things are going well, those are the times to remind yourself that, hey, you've gotten to this point and that you can be successful for those times where things might turn a little more challenging.
All right, unless any of the other panelists have something to share, I think let's move on to the next question. And this is to any of the panelists. So what was or what is your most passionate project that you're working on, and could you tell us about that?
Well, I can attack that. So I showed a little movie of this protein coming out of endothelial cells. And it turns out that that process, so the reason that we have this whole system is to, when we cut a vessel, that all of our blood doesn't flow out of it. So we have to have really intricate systems to stop that bleeding and stop it fast, because you cannot live without blood in your blood vessels. And so, recently, in the last several years, we've discovered that those same physiologic processes that stop the blood from going out are involved in many diseases, and including, for example, atherosclerosis, which is hardening of the arteries, which happens when people's cholesterol levels in the blood go up too high. The high cholesterol will stimulate the release of those things, and you'll get small clots forming on there that then get covered over, and eventually they occlude a blood vessel. It's also, as I mentioned earlier, involved in other diseases like sickle cell disease, like sepsis, which happens when you get a systemic bacterial infection. Malaria involves that system, and it looks like COVID-19, you've all heard a lot about blood clotting probably in COVID-19, that involves that. So in some ways, I mean, it's not the answer to everything, but it's involved in many things. So that's one of the things that I'm quite interested and passionate in.
I think this is a tricky question. It's like asking, who was your favorite child or something. So I would say that I like all the projects that we that we work on. Just a disclaimer. One of the things that really motivates me is trying to develop techniques where we can really see chemistry happen. So what I mean by that is we can make movies of atoms moving around during a chemical reaction. So one of the fun projects that we just completed was working with a whole group of collaborators at different national labs to really see how water molecules surrounding a particular solute molecule that was dissolved in solution, how the water molecules around there moved in phase, moved in step with the solute to initiate a particular process, a chemical process that resulted in sort of big changes. So this idea of really being able to make molecular movies has really inspires me.
I can add one more as well. Yeah, so I guess I guess a lot like Munira, it's hard to pick one, but I'll just kind of throw out a crazy idea that we're after right now, and that is that plastics come from petroleum. We pump oil out of the ground so that we can make all the plastics that we see today. What if bacteria could be genetically engineered to make plastics for you? So one of the things that we're working on in a big team is actually the idea of being able to 3D print with bacteria and then have them produce the plastic around. Right? So if you want a box, a plastic box, can we 3D print bacteria into the shape of a box and then have the bacteria grow the plastic around them? So kind of a different idea, I think, but one that's really exciting me right now.
Okay, so if none of the other panelists has anything to contribute to that discussion, we have another question for Dr. Nadia. How did you find volunteering opportunities at hospitals? And do you have any advice for finding such opportunities as a high school student?
Yeah, I gained my volunteering experience in high school by reaching out to one of my friend's moms who I knew worked in a care facility, and I said, hey, do you guys have any opportunities for high schoolers? And she said, yes, and then I got connected with their volunteer department. But then in college, a lot of times I've either looked on places that are near me's websites and seen if they had volunteer opportunities. And then with like shadowing physicians and stuff like that, I've a lot of times emailed physicians, or whenever I meet a doctor, I ask if they have any opportunities for shadowing them, or if they know anybody in their clinic who is open to having people shadow them and learn more about what they do. And another thing that I've done a lot is go on LinkedIn, and you can like filter people by if they've, like gone to the same high school or college as you. And so a lot of times I'll look at people who did bioengineering or bioethics at the University of Washington and are now in healthcare, and asked if I can speak with them or shadow or volunteer with them. And that's using like a common thing that you guys have, like, oh, you also did bioengineering at UW, can be really helpful to having people like know who you are and be willing to help you get those types of opportunities. But I definitely think like looking on websites, emailing around, and also in your own life when you meet people, just asking, because a lot of times people are really open to and want to help you learn more about what they do. And a lot of places can always use help.
Okay, this question is directed to any of the panelists, but it asks, what steps should I take if I want to study in the medical field?
I think one of the steps was just discussed there. If you want to study in the medical field, even though I didn't do this, I didn't know what I was getting myself into at all. But I think you should try to see. I mean, medicine is very broad, very, very broad. I mean, sometimes you don't even have to see patients. But if you think that you might like something, you should try to get a little bit of an idea of what that is like, as Nadia was just saying about, say, shadowing a physician or doing things like that. Of course, the other thing is to make sure that that you're doing all the things that are going to give you the requirements and make you a strong candidate. And of course, it's the usual things. I think volunteering is really important, though, and having shadowing experience and experience with being. The other thing I think is having experience with being around people that are in need, however that is. Medicine is one of the things that does that, but volunteering in food banks, things like that, and also the learning how to talk to people and how to make people comfortable. I think those are all things that are useful.
I can also add in on my kind of process up until getting accepted into medical school has been a lot of genuinely following my interests and seeing where that takes me, even if it doesn't seem directly related to applying to medical school. Doing an internship at a senator's office was a little bit out of left field, but and I always thought oh, would this time be better spent volunteering at a hospital? And during interviews for medical school, like that was something that I talked about a lot, and that I talked about how, oh, being a future physician would allow me to like really directly see the needs of people who need change from policy making, who need legislation changes, and how we can make healthcare more accessible. So even if an opportunity doesn't seem like it's like, oh, this draws a direct line in medical school, a lot of times if you're learning and growing and it gives you a different perspective, I think you should go for opportunities that you're interested in. And get all your other stuff done, like stay on top of which classes you should be taking. Yeah, chase all those experiences in medicine that are important to have, like Dr. Lopez said.
Okay, so I had another question. So how do you come up with ideas for your research?
Well, I'll take a crack at it. Or so I mean, I always come up with them in the shower. That's the answer. Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways. One is if you start to read, actually, if you start to read about a process that you're interested in, it's like you can't stop the ideas from coming. And then if you read a lot, then you start to synthesize all of that information and you get ideas of kind of what you could do to figure out. You get an idea of what's going on, and then you think about what you could do to test whether or not you're right. And that's, of course, that's the experiment. The other place that I get lots of ideas, of course, is just talking to people and listening and hearing what they're doing and letting them tell me about something. And as soon as they tell me about something that I didn't know anything about, of course, your brain right away will connect it to something that you do know something about. And sometimes there's a lot of connections there. So that's, at least that's how I do it. I'd like to hear what other people say.
Yeah, the shower works pretty well. But, you know, I think prior to going into the shower, maybe reading a lot, you know, so just there are publications in journals, scientific journals that tell us what's cutting edge and what others are learning. So that's usually where we start. And then from there, reading about other areas that I'm not familiar with. You know, for example, this idea of working with bacteria, it all emerged because I learned that, well, bacteria doesn't necessarily have to mean germs, right? We have bacteria in our body that are necessary for digesting our food. And so just understanding that, oh, wait, there's all these other processes and things that bacteria do. And you know, even for the production of vaccines that we're seeing go out today for COVID, I mean, we're using different types of yeast and bacteria to produce these vaccines as well. And this is on a very large scale. And so that kind of drove me to ask the question, well, what else could we do with them? And yeah, so for me, it's really about first focusing on my areas of immediate interest and becoming a very well, I guess, having a very good fundamental understanding of that area, and then reading about other spaces as well that I'm not familiar with so that I can move into those areas. And then one other plug I would make here too is that the American Chemical Society publishes a journal weekly known as Chemical and Engineering News. And this is a great, I guess, it's a great magazine if you just want to find out what's cutting edge in the field right now. So what is it that chemists and engineers are talking about? And I think that's also a good starting point just to find your areas of interest and new areas to move into.
Yeah, I think all of those are great points. I'll just add one more. I think when you when you go to college, you might think, oh, I shouldn't attend any seminars. So every department will have seminars where we bring in speakers from outside. of that school or university to share their work. And I always encourage undergraduate students to attend these seminars because you never know what you might learn. And you have sometimes the most interesting talks that I have been to are ones that I know absolutely nothing about, because I feel like I've just, I feel like a toddler, like I'm learning all these new things. So I really encourage all of you to attend talks, and even you might even consider looking at UW's website, since everything is on Zoom now. A lot of these talks are publicly available, so one could join in for a lot of these lectures.
We have a question for Nandita, and is what you're studying right now what you expected it to be like?
That's a great question. A little bit like yes and no. I definitely thought I had an understanding of what biochemistry as a subject would be before I definitely got into those classes, but once I did, I realized that, or what specifically the major focused on. So it was definitely more molecular and cellular for me than I had expected it to be. And as interesting as I thought the content was, I realized that I liked learning about health from a more community-based aspect. So to answer your question, yes and no.
This was a question directed to any panelist, but what was your experience like in medical school, and was it difficult, and was it like what you expected?
Medical school. Well, I went to medical school quite a while ago, but it was very difficult. I think it's just kind of overwhelming, the amount of information that you have to get, and I think too that the other thing, somebody asked earlier about motivation and being overwhelmed and being burned out and things like that. I think that you get so much and there's so much required of you that you might not even get the proper amount of sleep. You might not eat right, all of these things. But yeah, it's difficult. I don't know how. I know that there have been changes in medical education now. But I think that no matter how you cut it, there's just a lot to learn. And when you're done with 4 years, you're still just skimming the surface. Where I really learned medicine was doing the residency.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez, for that response. And that concludes our final panel. Thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to our moderators and everyone who helped make this happen. To our attendees, you are encouraged to consider coming to other panels the rest of the week. You can join from the links on our website. Also, in the chat is an after-event survey. Please fill this out. We value your feedback. Thank you, everyone, and that concludes STEM Fair.
Thank you.